Welcome back to the Fantasy Footballaholics, and this year we're going to be doing something different. I am going to be going over weekly matchups and guesstimates on how fantasy football players are going to do from my team and Dustin's team in our league. And if these help any of your players you're on our teams, then maybe you get some heads up if you should start them or not. And then if they're not on your team, then maybe you should look into trade for them or looking for a free agency, because we do got some guys on our bench that might be available in your league. I'm not going to go over every single player. Maybe in the future, in comments, you guys want to hear more about maybe starts of the week or sits of the week outside of our teams. But for now, I'm just going to go team to team, matchup to matchup, see how we do each week, and then we'll check our results from the previous week and see how it lined up. So we'll start off with my team, and we got Russell Wilson against the New England Patriots. Russell Wilson had a really good week one. Russell tends to do pretty good against big matchups, and especially on the road. But since this game is at home, that kind of hinders his performance, because usually the Seahawks like to run a little bit more and play some defensive style football at home. Versus on the road, he usually opens it up a little bit more, which he did against the Falcons, having the league lead number one fantasy week. But this week he has a really tough matchup. He's going against the Patriots. Patriots are obviously the number one fantasy football team last year. They led the league in interceptions. I don't expect Russell Wilson to throw a bunch of interceptions, but I do expect them to be cautious in their game plan to not put him in the position to make an interception. I could possibly see him throwing one pick here or there, lose a point or two, but for the most part, I feel like he's going to do pretty good. He was third in fantasy points last year. He put up some big games against some really good defenses. I know he played Pittsburgh last year, had 3 touchdowns, 300 yards. As of so far in this season, he put up 35 points last week, and then the Patriots defense put up 10 points. So it's a really tough matchup for Russ and for me. But I still feel like he's going to pull in 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, maybe throws a pick, gets 20 rushing yards. He'll have a solid game, nothing spectacular. So I'm guessing somewhere in the 24-point range is what I'm looking at. Maybe 26, nothing higher than that. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the Chiefs, they're going against Chargers. Chargers were 18th against the rush last year, so nothing too scary there. They have a pretty good pass rush, so I would expect the Chiefs to feature him a little more this week than last week, which seems kind of bullish because last week he did have over 100 yards rushing on 20-plus carries. If I was to debate how he was going to do, he got 19.8 points for us last year, almost pushed 20. And this is a fairly good matchup for him as well. So I do predict a little more pass catching this week. So maybe he has like 30 receiving yards, 70 rushing yards. But I still think he's going to get a touchdown. Chargers defense isn't ranked really high anymore. They got a few players hurt. Their safeties are done for the year. So they're going to really get some yards through the air. And I think instead of throwing out the receivers, they might dump the ball off a little bit more. So like you said, he'll get 3-4 catches, 60 yards rushing. So I'm thinking he's getting around 16 points this week. A little less than last week, but still going to be a great game plan for him. Josh Jacobs last week exploded. It led the league in rushing, fantasy-wise. He had 3 touchdowns over 100 yards. He is going up against the Saints, who had the 5th best rushing defense last year, so it was a really tough matchup against him. And even week 1 against Tampa Bay, they kind of shut down Tom Brady and that company. So this is another tough matchup. As you go through my lineup, I have a lot of tough matchups in fantasy this week. So don't expect big things from Josh Jacobs. I expect about 75 rushing yards. I doubt he's going to get in the end zone. The Raiders are going to have to try to do that through the air. So I do predict him to get 75 rushing yards. So that's 7.5 points. It's not a bad game. I just don't expect big things from him. He had 30 points last week. To expect him to get a few touchdowns again is kind of unreasonable. So maybe he gets a touchdown here and gets that up to like 13 or 14, but probably around 70 yards rushing is what I expect. So he'll probably get, 60-some rushing yards, maybe a catch or two. Next up, my debate of the week between David Montgomery and David Johnson. David Johnson actually had a really good week, so I'm not afraid to start him, but he is going against the Baltimore Ravens. So David Johnson, I'm looking around 70 yards, not a touchdown. He got a touchdown last week. They really stopped featuring because they were down so much by the Chiefs. But this week they're going against one of the top run defenses again. I think they're right around the same as they are the same as Baltimore, but about the same as the Saints. They're around top 5. Really good rush defense. So I do expect David Johnson to struggle. Their offense struggled in general, so they're probably going to try to feature run early, but teams don't really run against the Baltimore Ravens. So it's somewhere between 50 rushing yards and 20 receiving is kind of what I'm predicting. So my debate there is between him and David Montgomery, and since David Montgomery has a better matchup, this is the matchup I'm going to go with more than likely. So he plays the Giants. The Giants did pretty decent defense in week 1. They're middle of the road in about 20. So nothing spectacular, and it's probably going to be a pretty close game. So they should lean on the run a lot more than they did last week because they were coming from behind. But even so, last week he had 70 rushing yards, so it was a good week. But I expect him to get a little more than that. So he'll probably get about 86 rushing yards, maybe 10 through the air. So and then I do predict him to get a touchdown. So I'm looking at about 15.5 points for Montgomery. When you sit here and try to predict rushing touchdowns or receiving touchdowns, it's not always that accurate, but sometimes you just have to assume from a matchup what the total is going to be, and because of the Giants, it's going to be a close game. I feel like they're going to keep it close, so his rushing should be really effective. So pretty sure I'm starting him. Not 100% positive yet. Gotta have to wait till see how the week goes out. Maybe Montgomery's injury is going to flare back up, so maybe I'll be forced to put David Johnson in. But we'll see as the week goes. Marquise Brown playing Houston. Houston's defense is pretty bad. Last year, Houston ranked 19th in pass defense, or 29th in pass defense. Sorry, they're the third at the bottom. And Kansas City didn't really have to just air them out because they had such a big lead early. So this game probably the similar game. So I expect Baltimore to continue their philosophy and run the ball. But Marquise Brown is their number 1 receiver and looks like the only receiving option that they really go for. So I don't expect a touchdown from him. I just expect a solid, 5-catch, 60-yard game, so he'll get a solid 6 points for me. Maybe 65 yards is a little more accurate. Man, why does this keep taking away my points? 16. Let's see. Montgomery, I had 20. One sec here. Let's restart this really quick. So 24 for Russ, 16 for Clyde. David Montgomery around 15. Those round him up a little bit more. And then who's that? Russ, Clyde, and Josh Jacobs about 7, I believe I said. So that's 62. So Marquise, I'll give roughly around 6 as well. 6.5 round down because I rounded up earlier. Sanders here, this is another kind of debate I did. I really want to try to play CD Lamb, but I still want to give them more time. They are playing Atlanta, which is a really bad defense as well. They were ranked towards the bottom 12 last year in pass protection. And they are going to be doing a shootout probably against the Cowboys. The problem here is probably want to keep the game a little closer. It might be a little more tight game, so they might want to run the ball a little bit more. Plus, they got 2 of their receivers. They didn't really get they got Cooper involved last week, but they didn't really get their other guy involved. So CeeDee Lamb might see a little drop off. It might be about the same, so he might be around 60 yards, which I think is solid. But I think the play I'm going to play is Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders is going to be the number 1 target for the Saints against a Raiders team that doesn't really have that good a pass coverage. I believe the Raiders were somewhere mid-tier of the pack last year. And now that Michael Thomas is down, Sanders did get had a decent game. He had a touchdown, a couple catches. Wasn't anything spectacular, but he's literally their only receiver left on the roster. So I could look for him to have a decent game. I could totally see another touchdown, but I'm not going to give it to him. I figure they're going to run the ball in more against the Raiders. Probably will be a little tight since Michael Thomas is out. But I do expect him to have a solid game, about 80 rushing yards, so a good amount of 8 points. But after that, Mark Andrews pretty much exploded. The first game had a couple touchdowns, didn't have many yards. Kind of expect the opposite this time. So I look for the Ravens to run the ball fairly quick because they're going to get to a big lead, unless Houston turns things around, which probably not. Houston's defense isn't very well, so Mark Andrews will have some chances, but I'm looking here and have about 60 yards, so another 6 points. He could get a touchdown, but you're just coming off a double touchdown game. You don't just string touchdowns together. Usually they come in bunches, one here, one there, two here, two there. So 60 yards is a pretty good accurate estimate. Dallas is going to be going to Atlanta. As you notice from my team, I got a lot of the similarities, so I got a lot of double ups. They're going to be kicking in Dallas, I believe, and it's going to be his first game in the Dome. And I expect this game to be a pretty big shootout, so I'm expecting a lot of things from Zerline here. Probably they're going to score around 30 points, so I'm guessing like 4 touchdowns and a field goal. So 4 touchdowns and a field goal is right around, 40-yard field goal, 4 points, plus 4 extra points, that's 8. It's a solid 8-point game. Actually, I predicted 2 field goals, so 11-point game, sorry. I did expect this to be a high-scoring game, so that puts me at 93. And then you got Seahawks defense against the Patriots. Cam Newton had a game where he didn't have to throw the ball. Didn't play a very tough opponent. Definitely has a tough opponent going to Seattle, so they're going to have to throw the ball more often. Before he got hurt last year, his throwing looked really inconsistent. Didn't really have to prove anything against the Dolphins, so he's going to have to throw the ball. So I do expect him to have a couple turnovers, maybe a fumble rushing the ball, maybe a throwing interception. So Seahawks could get a couple points there. They might sack him once or twice. So I do expect the Seahawks to have a really solid game. They might give up 20 points. I'm kind of looking at like a 27-20 game. New England's defense is really well, but I think the Seahawks defense is going to shut Cam Newton out pretty well. He's not explosive as he used to be, because he did have some good games against the Seahawks in the past. So I'll give the Seahawks 9 points. So that puts my total around 102. Would I be super stoked with that? Not necessarily, but I think that's something I could live with. And if we just compare it real quick to the other team, just the projections. You'd have to go to the other thing, but let's just look at their matchups really quick. Kyler Murray's playing a really tough Washington defense. Kind of expect him similar to Russ, to get in the mid-20s. Tariq Cohen against the Giants. They're going to run the ball, but he wouldn't be a feature back. He's more of a scat back, but he could have a solid game. Eckler is going to need to have a big game to stay with the Chiefs. He didn't have a good game in week 1. Crowder against the Niners. Sherman's out. He could have some good matchups here, good scores. Metcalf against the Patriots. Got really tough matchups outside. Allen Robinson's disgruntled, and he's playing against the Giants. Still a good matchup, but who knows where his head's at. Zach Ertz, same thing. Contract negotiation going against the Rams. Fairly good matchup here because they're going to want to get rid of the ball fast. So I kind of like that matchup. Seahawks are going to probably have to kick a few field goals against the Patriots, so it's another good matchup. And then Pittsburgh's obviously doesn't look very good, so Denver's a good matchup. So this is going to be a pretty tight game. Just a flash look. His team's not nearly anywhere as good as mine. I'm not trying to boast, but it's probably going to be roughly around 85 for him. So I'm predicting 102 to 85, so a nice, easy 17-point win for me. And now I'm going to do Dustin real quick before I call this video. Dustin, I didn't get to my last game. I won my last game fairly large. I had number one in the week in points, scoring 145-ish. And then my team against me scored only 80-some, so I had a pretty big blowout. Dustin actually played very well, scored roughly 110, but played against the guy who scored the second most last week, so he lost, putting him behind me in the division 1-0 to 0-1. So Dustin's team, Dak Prescott had a really bad week as far as what he did last year. I don't see that being an issue this week. He's going against Atlanta. Russ just put up 35 points. I feel like Dak's going to do roughly the same. 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, probably get 20 yards on the ground. Not going to give him as high as Russ, but I think a solid 32 is about what he's going to do. I think they'll take control just like the Seahawks did, but they're going to be a little more smart and run the ball a little bit more with Zeke, so his stats might be not as high as Russ, but he's going to have a solid 30-point game. Chris Carson at home, love this matchup. They're not going to be able to throw as much against the Patriots, so I think they're going to pound the ball early. I do expect him to get a touchdown. I wouldn't. He's not going to get as many receiving yards as last week. Maybe he catches 1 catch for 5 yards, but I think he's going to have 70 yards and a touchdown. I think they're going to kind of share the load with Hyde, but still 70 yards and a touchdown is a good fantasy week. It's a solid 13 points. Alvin Kamara is going against the Raiders, run-of-the-mill defense, 17th in rush lat this year so far. In 2019, they were 17th as well. So I expect them to be in the middle. Last year, Alvin Kamara was 17th top back. He missed a couple games, so he could have been top 12. So I kind of expect him to do Alvin Kamara things. I expect him to catch about 40 yards in the air and run for about 50 yards. Don't expect another big touchdown game, so I'm looking at probably 9 points for him. Raheem Mostert going against the Jets, tough defense. They were 12th in rushing last year. They had a pretty good week this year in fantasy. I don't think they scored many points, but they had a good job against the yardage-wise. 49ers offense didn't look very good, and Mostert himself really didn't look that great besides long touchdown run. I do expect this to be a close game, and the Niners aren't going to want to try to throw the ball too much because Garoppolo didn't look that well. So I do expect them to run the ball, but I expect this to be a shared carry there. McKinnon looked pretty good in third down, so I think Mosert's going to be mainly first and second down running backs, and he's going to share a little bit more with Coleman because Coleman was kind of questionable the first game. So I do expect Mostert to get around 50 yards and a touchdown. So I expect him to have a good game. Back-to-back games with touchdowns, but I don't think his yardage will be that high, so I'm looking around 11 points. DJ Chark against Tennessee. Chark did really well against Tennessee last year. He scored a touchdown the first game and had 70 yards receiving, so I don't see that being any difference. He obviously plays the Titans twice every year. The second game he had 40 yards and no touchdowns. But his first game he didn't have a touchdown, and last year he had 8, so I think it's a pretty good bet he's going to get a touchdown and get back to his connection he had with Minshew. Minshew looked really good week 1, so I don't see this changing much. Tennessee does have a really good defense, but their pass defense isn't as good as you think. It was 24th last year, and that's more because teams were trailing a little bit because they kept the game close, so they couldn't really run on the Titans. So it's kind of just how the Titans go. They have a good defense, but they give up passing yards because teams don't want to rush against them. So I kind of expect the same thing, 70-some yards and a touchdown. So we'll go with 13 points for Chark. Galladay is going against Green Bay. If Galladay plays, we're just gonna assume for the sake of this video he does. I do expect Galladay to have since it's his first game of the year. And he goes against Green Bay. Last year against Green Bay, he had 120 yards one game and 70-some yards the other game. So he averaged out about 90 yards, maybe close to 100. And he didn't score a touchdown. And after watching the last game where Stafford had a rookie running back drop a touchdown pass, he's probably going to go to a receiver he likes, and Galladay is his favorite receiver. And Green Bay's offense looked pretty good last game. And even though Green Bay's pass defense is towards the middle of the road, so it's pretty good, and they have a good pass rush, I feel like interdivision games are always going to be close. So I do expect Galladay to play this game and to get a touchdown. I'm looking for 16 points. I think he'll get 80 yards and a touchdown. So it's going to be a really good game for him, for Dustin's first receiver selected in the draft. And Goddard, tight end, Philly. Dustin drafted a Cowboys tight end who got hurt all year, who I kind of pushed him in the drafting. But he ended up getting a really good steal because the Eagles want to use 2 tight ends, and Goddard had an amazing breakout game. The Rams are a tough matchup, and Aaron Donald's going to do a lot of damage to them, but I look to Wentz to throw the ball quick right away, so running backs, tight ends. It looks like right now Goddard might be his number one selection, especially since Ertz might be out in a contract. I expect a fairly tight game here, not much scoring. Wentz looked a little shaky. Maybe they'll try to run the ball a little more, but I do expect Goddard to have about 70 yards or so. So a solid 7-point game. Kansas City always scoring points, so he has a great kicker. I expect this to be 27-24 game. It's in division game, so I don't really feel like the Chiefs are just going to dominate this game as much as people would think, and I think the Chargers could put some pressure on Mahomes, so they're going to be throwing pretty quick. So it's might going to be a little more controlled game, which kind of why I gave Clyde Edwards a little more points. I still expect them to score 27, so 2 field goals and 3 extra points, so you're still looking around 12 points, so it's another solid game for him. And then the Steelers defense. The Steelers defense is the best defense in the league, and every week he's going to have a good chance of getting some points. This week he goes against Denver, who has average run-of-the-mill offense. They're 18th in rushing and 18th in passing this last week with their rookie quarterback, and I kind of expect the Steelers to do the same thing they did last week. So they'll probably give up 17 points, get a couple sacks, maybe a couple turnovers. So it's going to be 4 points for turnovers. Let's say 3 points for sacks, 2 points for sacks, 6 points, and they'll get another 3 points for the score. So it's going to be a solid 9-point game. So I'm looking for Dustin to get around 122. So I do expect him to have a better week than me. He's not as tough matchups across the board, and his tough matchups are like teams that are at home who want to run the ball to keep the game close, or teams that have some injuries. They got to change their philosophy, or guys coming back, or new matchups trying to look for division rivals that might know each other. So those guys both played really good last week. So he has some really good matchups. So I expect him to get 122. And quick look at his matchup. Watson against Baltimore. He's going to have a rough time there with their offensive line issues. And yeah, it's bad. I mean, Watson does get trash points fairly easy. So, he'd probably get 24. And then you got Chubb splitting carries against Cincinnati. They're probably going to pound the ball against Cincinnati. As bad as Baker Mayfield looked, they're just going to run the ball. So I expect him to get a touchdown and 80 yards at least. So that's 14 points. You're looking at 34. Ingram splitting carries, but they're going to run the ball so much against Houston. So wouldn't be surprised if he got a touchdown, 60 yards. So that's another 12 points. So 16, 28 plus 22, that's 50. Adrian Peterson, I don't really expect him to start. Maybe he'll play Carlos Hyde. So that's, let's see where we're at again. So I got 30, 50. Hyde might get 40, 50 yards. He might get a touchdown, but 40 yards is more realistic. 54. Stephon Diggs had a big game. Division rivalry here. Miami should be able to play him pretty tight. Maybe 7 points. So 67. Jones against Dallas. He's due for a touchdown. He's gonna get 90 in a touchdown. So 67. You're looking about 83. Waller against the Saints. Tough matchup. Maybe look for 50, 60 yards. So that's 88. Houston versus Baltimore. Houston's going to have trouble. They might get some field goals, though. So let's say they get 2 field goals and 3 field goals and a touchdown. Maybe 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals. So that's 8 points, 96. And then the Chiefs' defense against the Chargers, 96 points there roughly. And then the Chargers are going to struggle and might get sacked like 3 times, have 1 turnover. 3, 5. So yeah, they're around the 105, 110 range. It's definitely a tougher matchup than I have, but I still have about the same results. Both of us win by about 12 points maybe, and that's kind of what I'm going to do each week. Just going to go over our teams, kind of give estimates of what I think, and then I'll go back next week and see roughly how close I was. J.K. Dobbins for him could potentially start over Mozart for really quick if the Chargers like McKinnon as much as it looks like. So it's going to be maybe a Dobbins play soon for him. Gibson looks like he's still kind of struggling to take the backfield. Paris Campbell's definitely solid play if Galladay goes out. I think Dustin's probably going to look Campbell. Minnesota's defense is garbage. It's a really good play. Judy gets Pittsburgh. You ain't going to touch that. And Rager versus the Rams. Rager had a great catch for like 50 yards, but then he had a couple drops. So the only alternative here is probably Paris Campbell this week if Galladay doesn't play. And back to my team, just real quick. I picked up Chase Edmonds in free agency. If Drake goes down, then this would be a great pickup. I still could play David Johnson. I really don't want to touch that Baltimore matchup. And Brandon Cooks looked really bad week 1. He's injured. Only had 2 points. Probably not going to play him until he has a breakout game. Debating CeeDee Lamb a little bit over Sanders. CeeDee Lamb is definitely a better player and on a better offense, but when you get down to being the only weapon left, since the number 1 receiver is out and you get to be the number 1 versus the number 3, this is kind of probably going that way. So this is the Fantasy Footballers, and if you have any questions on any players you're trying to decide on playing, just shoot me a call in the comments and I'll let you know before Thursday night's game, or if the players are Sunday night or Monday night, I'll let you know by then. Have a good night.